If you were forced to witness an act of cruelty, would you have the courage to intervene? Prepare yourself to hear a deeply moving story of survival, resilience, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. This true story that unfolded in Portland, Oregon, will take you on an emotional journey that will leave you both heartbroken and inspired by the incredible triumph of the spirit. His name would later be known as Chance, but on that cold December morning, he was just another unwanted dog, a medium-sized tan and white mixed breed with soulful brown eyes that seemed to carry the weight of his difficult past. No one knew exactly where he came from, or how long he had been wandering alone before that fateful day when his life would hang in the balance and then change forever. Sarah Miller was driving to her nursing shift at Providence Portland Medical Center, taking the Morrison Bridge, as she did every morning, completely unaware that her routine commute was about to transform her life. The 34-year-old single mother of two had always been an animal lover, though her small apartment and busy schedule had prevented her from adopting a pet of her own, despite her children's frequent pleas. The sky that morning was a dismal gray, heavy with rain clouds that mirrored the economic depression that had hit the city hard that winter. Many families were struggling, and the local animal shelters were overwhelmed with surrendered pets, casualties of financial hardship and desperation that sometimes drove people to unthinkable acts. Beneath the bridge, the Willamette River flowed dark and threatening, swollen from recent rainfall and churning with dangerous currents that could challenge even the strongest swimmer. The water temperature hovered just above freezing, a deadly trap for any creature unfortunate enough to fall in without immediate rescue. Michael Torres, a 48-year-old homeless veteran who had made his camp beneath the eastern end of the bridge, was the only witness to what happened before Sarah arrived. He had been collecting recyclables at dawn when he spotted a pickup truck stopping at the bridge's midpoint, an unusual sight that immediately put him on alert. The bridge was typically busy with morning commuters, but a temporary lane closure had created a brief window where traffic was sparse, leaving few witnesses to what was about to unfold. The driver of the pickup, a man in his 30s wearing a dark hoodie, seemed to be checking if anyone was watching before reaching into the truck bed. What Torres saw next would haunt him for months. The man pulled out a dog by a rope tied around its neck, the animal visibly trembling and trying to resist as it was dragged toward the bridge railing. The dog, Chance, was clearly terrified, his tail tucked between his legs as he tried desperately to plant his paws on the concrete. Torres began running toward them, shouting and waving his arms, but he was too far away to intervene in time. In one cruel, swift motion, the man lifted the struggling dog and threw him over the railing into the churning waters below, then quickly jumped back into his truck and sped away. The splash was barely audible over the sound of the river and distant traffic, but the sight of the dog hitting the water sent a surge of desperate urgency through Torres. He knew he couldn't swim well enough to attempt a rescue, so he began running along the riverbank, trying to keep sight of the dog while frantically waving to get the attention of anyone who might help. Sarah was approaching the bridge when she noticed the commotion, a man running along the riverbank pointing frantically at something in the water. She slowed her car, peering over the side of the bridge, her heart stopping when she spotted a dog struggling against the current, its head barely above water as it fought desperately to stay afloat. Without hesitation, Sarah pulled her car to the side of the road, emergency lights flashing as she called 911 with trembling fingers. "There's a dog in the river under the Morrison Bridge," she shouted into the phone, already running toward the nearest access point to the riverbank, praying she wasn't too late. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched the dog being swept downstream, its strength visibly fading with each passing second. The dispatcher promised help was on the way, but Sarah knew with terrible certainty that by the time emergency services arrived, the dog would be gone. Another silent tragedy in a city that had seen too many. The bitter wind cut through her thin jacket as she ran, her nursing scrubs offering little protection against the December chill, but the adrenaline pumping through her veins kept her moving forward. She could see the dog was still fighting, a testament to his will to live despite the cruelty that had put him in those deadly waters. What Sarah didn't know as she raced along the riverbank was that Chance had already survived more trauma than most animals could endure. The rope marks around his neck told a story of neglect and possible abuse, suggesting he had been tied up for long periods with little shelter or care. His ribs were visible beneath his wet fur, evidence of prolonged hunger and neglect by whoever had owned him before. The frigid water was rapidly sapping Chance's body heat, and hypothermia was setting in with alarming speed. Each desperate paddle of his legs became more labored, his movements growing increasingly uncoordinated as the cold penetrated to his core. With each passing second, the churning current pulled him further from shore, making rescue increasingly unlikely. Torres had reached a point where the riverbank jutted out, allowing him to run ahead of where Chance was struggling in the current. His years on the streets had taught him every inch of the river's edge, knowledge that might now save a life. He spotted a low-hanging branch extending over the water, about 50 yards downstream, and realized it might be their only chance. Sarah had lost sight of the dog momentarily as she navigated the uneven terrain of the riverbank, her heart pounding with fear that she was already too late. When she spotted Torres waving frantically from further downstream, she changed direction, stumbling over rocks and debris in her desperate sprint to reach him, before the dog was swept past the point of rescue. "He's coming this way," Torres shouted as Sarah reached him, both of them scanning the churning water for any sign of Chance. The dog appeared briefly, then disappeared under the surface, emerging seconds later with visibly weaker movements. Sarah's medical training told her that the animal had minutes at most before the cold would overcome his will to survive. Without discussing a plan, both rescuers understood what needed to be done. Torres lay on his stomach on the low-hanging branch, extending himself as far over the water as he dared, while Sarah grabbed his ankles to anchor him. The branch creaked ominously under their weight, threatening to snap at any moment and plunge them both into the deadly current. Chance was now just barely keeping his nose above water, his eyes wide with terror as he fought against the overwhelming exhaustion and cold. Each breath came as a desperate gasp, water splashing into his mouth as he struggled to keep his head up. The current was pushing him directly toward Torres's outstretched arms, their one chance at saving him. "Come on, boy, come on," Torres called, his voice cracking with emotion, as he stretched his arms as far as they would go. Sarah held tight to his ankles, her muscles straining with the effort of keeping them both from falling into the river. She could feel the branch bending dangerously beneath them, knowing they had seconds at most before it would give way. With a final surge of effort that seemed to come from somewhere beyond physical endurance, Chance paddled toward the sound of Torres's voice, his instinct to survive overriding the trauma and exhaustion that threatened to drag him under. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, his eyes met Torres's, a silent connection between two souls who understood what it meant to fight against impossible odds. Torres' fingers brushed against wet fur once, twice, and then closed around the loose skin at the back of Chance's neck. "I got him," he shouted, his voice breaking with emotion as he pulled the dog toward him with strength born of pure adrenaline. Sarah began slowly pulling them both back, inch by precious inch, aware that any sudden movement could send all three of them into the water. The branch creaked and sagged beneath their weight, dropping low enough that Torres' chest and arms were now submerged in the freezing water. His teeth chattered violently from the cold, but his grip on Chance remained unbreakable as Sarah continued to pull them back to safety. "Just a little more," she encouraged, her voice strained with effort. "We're almost there." When they finally reached solid ground, Torres collapsed in exhaustion, releasing Chance onto the muddy riverbank. The dog lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, his eyes half closed and his body trembling violently from the cold. Sarah immediately switched into her nursing mode, assessing him with professional efficiency despite her own shaking hands. "He's in shock and severely hypothermic," she said, already removing her jacket to wrap around the dog's cold body. "We need to get him warm immediately." The distant wail of sirens suggested that help was finally on its way. But Sarah knew that every second counted in cases of severe hypothermia. Without proper treatment, Chance could still die despite their successful rescue. Torres, though soaked and shivering himself, removed his only warm layer, a tattered but clean flannel shirt, and added it to the makeshift blanket around Chance. "I've seen animals pulled from the river before," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the dog's face. "But I've never seen one fight so hard to live. This one's special." As the paramedics and animal control officers finally arrived at the scene, Sarah found herself reluctant to let go of Chance, feeling an unexpected connection to this dog who had fought so valiantly against both human cruelty and nature's indifference. "He needs emergency veterinary care," she told the officers firmly. and I want to know where he's being taken. I'm going to check on him after my shift." The next 12 hours were critical for Chance's survival as the veterinary team at Oregon Humane Society worked tirelessly to combat his hypothermia, exhaustion, and the numerous other health issues revealed by his examination. X-rays showed old fractures that had healed poorly, suggesting a history of physical abuse long before he had been thrown from the bridge. Sarah finished her nursing shift in a fog of distraction, her thoughts constantly returning to the dog she had helped rescue that morning. The experience had awakened something in her, a fierce protective instinct that surprised her with its intensity. As soon as her shift ended, she drove directly to the Humane Society, praying that Chance had survived the day. Dr. Melissa Chen, the veterinarian who had been treating Chance since his arrival, met Sarah in the waiting room with cautious optimism. "He's a fighter," she told Sarah, leading her to the intensive care area where Chance was being monitored. "His body temperature has stabilized, and he's responding well to treatment. But he's not out of the woods yet." The sight of Chance, connected to IV fluids and warming blankets, hit Sarah harder than she had expected. Despite his ordeal, the dog lifted his head slightly when she approached, and the look in his eyes, a mixture of wariness and something that might have been recognition, brought tears to her eyes. She reached out slowly, allowing him to sniff her hand before gently stroking his head. "The police want statements from both you and Mr. Torres about what you witnessed, Doctor," Chen said quietly as Sarah sat beside Chance's kennel. "They've already identified the truck from bridge cameras, and they're looking for the owner. What you both did, it's going to make a difference not just for this dog, but hopefully for others too." The story of Chance's rescue spread rapidly through local media and social media channels, touching hearts across the city and beyond. Security footage from the bridge had captured the act of cruelty, and public outrage was fueling a determined effort to find the person responsible. Within days, donations for Chance's medical care had exceeded expectations, with many people asking about adoption. Michael Torres, who had initially been reluctant to give a formal statement due to past negative experiences with authorities, found himself welcomed as a hero at the police station. The detective handling the case, herself a dog owner, treated him with respect that had been rare in his experiences with law enforcement. "Without you, this dog wouldn't have had a chance," she told him, the unintentional pun giving Chance his name. Sarah visited Chance every day after her shifts, bringing her children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Liam, once his condition had stabilized enough for visitors. The children were instantly drawn to the gentle dog, who, despite his traumatic past, responded to their careful attention with growing trust that touched the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. He needs us," Emma declared on their third visit, her young face serious as she gently stroked Chance's head. "He doesn't have anyone else." Liam nodded in solemn agreement, his small hand resting protectively on Chance's side. "The bad man might come back if we don't take him," he added, voicing a fear that had occurred to Sarah as well. The decision to apply for adoption wasn't an easy one for Sarah, who was keenly aware of the limitations of her small apartment and busy schedule. But watching her children with Chance and feeling the growing connection in her own heart, she knew that some bonds were too meaningful to ignore. She filled out the application, though Dr. Chen warned her that many others had expressed interest. What Sarah didn't know was that Torres had also been visiting Chance regularly, bringing small treats approved by the veterinary staff and sitting quietly beside the recovering dog for hours. The shelter staff had noticed how Chance responded to him, how the dog's eyes would track Torres around the room, and how his tail would wag gently whenever the man spoke to him. 2 weeks after the rescue, Dr. Chen called Sarah and Torres to a meeting at the shelter, along with the Director of Adoption Services. "Chance is ready for placement in a permanent home," Dr. Chen explained, her expression unreadable as she looked between the two people who had saved his life. "We've reviewed all applications carefully, considering what would be best for him after all he's been through." The director took over, explaining that while many wonderful families had applied to adopt Chance, they had to consider his specific needs and trauma history. "He's formed strong attachments to both of you," she told Sarah and Torres, "and separating him from the humans he trusts could cause significant setbacks in his recovery." Then she proposed something unexpected, a shared adoption arrangement where Chance would live primarily with Sarah and her children, but Torres would have regular visitation and care responsibilities. "Mr. Torres, we understand you're currently staying at the Veterans Transitional Housing Program," she said. "They've confirmed that Chance would be welcome there during your scheduled times with him." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as she turned to Torres, seeing his shock and emotion mirrored in his weathered face. "I think that sounds perfect," she said, reaching out to shake his hand. "Chance brought us together for a reason. Maybe he needs both of us." Torres nodded, unable to speak as he grasped her hand, the connection between them solidified by their shared love for the dog they had saved. Chance's first night in Sarah's apartment was a study in cautious adaptation. The dog explored his new environment slowly, startling at unfamiliar sounds and retreating to the corner of the living room where Sarah had prepared a soft bed surrounded by a low barrier that created a safe space. Emma and Liam, though excited, respected the boundaries Sarah had established, understanding that their new family member needed time to feel secure. What surprised Sarah most was how Chance positioned himself throughout the night, not in the comfortable bed they had prepared, but on the floor beside Liam's room, as if appointing himself guardian of the child who had expressed fear of the bad man returning. By morning, when Sarah found him still vigilantly stationed outside her son's door, she understood that Chance was already defining his role in their family. The arrangement with Torres proved beneficial beyond what anyone had anticipated. Twice a week, Torres would take Chance for long walks along the river, not near the bridge where the trauma had occurred, but further upstream where the paths were quiet and peaceful. These outings seemed to fulfill something essential in both of them. For Torres, a sense of purpose and companionship. For Chance, the security of being with someone who understood what it meant to rebuild a life. Dr. Chen had warned them that Chance might display behavioral issues stemming from his trauma, fear, aggression, anxiety, or destructive tendencies, but as weeks passed, the dog showed remarkable resilience. He remained cautious around strange men, particularly those wearing hoodies similar to his abusers, but his capacity for trust expanded steadily, encompassing not just his immediate family, but the wider community of supporters who had followed his story. The police investigation yielded results 3 months after the incident, when officers arrested a 37-year-old man named Derek Lawson for animal cruelty and illegal dumping. The evidence against him was substantial: bridge camera footage, DNA matching from the rope left in his truck, and ultimately a confession. The district attorney, responding to community pressure, pursued the case with unusual vigor, seeking maximum penalties. Sarah and Torres both attended every court hearing, sometimes bringing Chance, now certified as a therapy dog in training, to sit quietly in the back of the courtroom. His presence served as a powerful reminder of what was at stake, not just justice for one act of cruelty, but recognition of the seriousness of animal abuse and its connection to broader patterns of violence. The most powerful moment came during the sentencing phase, when the judge allowed Sarah to make a victim impact statement, with Chance present beside her. The man who threw this dog from a bridge assumed he was disposable, that his life didn't matter, she told the hushed courtroom. But Chance proved him wrong. He not only survived what was meant to kill him, he's thrived and transformed lives around him. Lawson was sentenced to 18 months in prison, the maximum allowed under Oregon law, along with a lifetime ban on animal ownership and mandatory psychological counseling. As he was led from the courtroom, he avoided looking at Chance, who watched the proceedings with the calm dignity that had become his trademark, seemingly understanding that this chapter of his story was finally closing. The publicity surrounding the case led to unexpected opportunities for advocacy. Sarah was invited to speak at animal welfare conferences, often with Chance at her side, sharing their story to promote stronger animal protection laws. Emma and Liam joined a youth program at the Humane Society, learning about responsible pet care and helping socialize other rescued animals. Perhaps most remarkably, Torres found a new direction through his connection with Chance. His reliability in caring for the dog impressed the staff at the Veterans Transitional Housing Program, who recommended him for a job at a local animal shelter. The position came with stable housing in an on-site apartment, giving him his first permanent home in years and a chance to use his natural affinity with traumatized animals. Chance's physical recovery progressed beyond what the veterinarians had initially expected. The limp from his old injuries became barely noticeable, and his once dull coat grew thick and shiny with proper nutrition and care. People who met him for the first time were often surprised to learn his history, seeing only a friendly, well-adjusted dog with an unusual talent for comforting those in distress. This talent led to Chance's certification as a therapy dog a year after his rescue, specializing in working with traumatized children and veterans with PTSD. The children responded to him instinctively, seeming to sense that he understood their pain in a way others couldn't. The veterans, including some from Torres's support group, found in Chance a non-judgmental presence that made difficult therapy sessions more bearable. Sarah's small apartment eventually gave way to a modest house with a fenced yard, a move made possible partly through a surprising source, a book deal. A local publisher had approached her about telling Chance's story, seeing in it universal themes of resilience, second chances, and the healing power of compassion. The advance allowed her to provide a more suitable home for her growing family. The book, titled Chance the Dog Who Fell and Rose Again, became a national bestseller, bringing Chance's story to a wider audience and inspiring similar rescue efforts across the country. The royalties were divided between a college fund for Sarah's children and a foundation established in Chance's name to support emergency veterinary care for animals whose owners couldn't afford treatment. On the one-year anniversary of the rescue, Sarah organized a celebration at the park near her new home, inviting everyone who had played a role in Chance's journey, from Dr. Chen and her staff to the emergency responders who had arrived at the scene, the detectives who had pursued the case, and the many supporters who had followed his progress online. Torres, now a respected member of the animal rescue community, stood beside Sarah as they thanked everyone who had helped transform a tragedy into triumph. As Chance moved among the gathered crowd at his anniversary celebration, greeting old friends and charming new ones with his gentle presence, the transformation from the terrified dog in the river to this confident, loving animal seemed nothing short of miraculous. Children who knew his story asked to touch the small scar on his shoulder, a badge of survival that parents used to teach lessons about resilience and compassion. What no one could have predicted was how Chance's story would ripple outward, affecting lives far beyond his immediate circle. The case had led to legislative changes in Oregon, strengthening penalties for animal abuse and establishing a statewide registry of convicted animal abusers. Similar bills were being considered in neighboring states, with advocates citing Chance's law as their inspiration and model. For Sarah's children, the experience had shaped their developing values and aspirations. Emma, now 11, had declared her intention to become a veterinarian, while Liam had overcome his fears and gained confidence through his role in helping rehabilitate their rescued pet. The children who had once begged for a dog just to play with now understood the deeper responsibility and rewards of saving a life. Torres, perhaps, had experienced the most profound transformation. The man who had once been invisible to society, sleeping under the same bridge from which Chance had been thrown, was now a respected community member with stable housing, meaningful work, and a restored sense of purpose. "That dog pulled me out of the river too," he often said, just in a different way. Sarah herself reflected on how close she had come to driving past that morning, how easily she might have missed seeing Torres waving frantically from the riverbank. A few seconds difference in timing, a momentary distraction, and Chance's story would have ended in the cold waters of the Willamette. The thought still gave her chills, reinforcing her belief that some connections were meant to be, arriving exactly when needed most. In the years that followed, Chance would go on to touch countless more lives through his therapy work and public appearances. Children facing court proceedings, veterans struggling with trauma, elderly patients in hospice care, all found comfort in the presence of the dog, who seemed to carry an innate understanding of suffering and the patient wisdom of one who had overcome it. The bridge where Chance's journey began was eventually commemorated with a small plaque bearing his picture and the words, "Even in our darkest moments, compassion creates ripples of hope." Joggers and commuters passing by would often pause to read it, many knowing the story behind it, others learning it for the first time and feeling moved to share it with others. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of Chance's story was the way it changed how people perceived both animals and those on society's margins. The partnership between a homeless veteran and a nurse, united by their commitment to saving a dog others had discarded, challenged assumptions and broke down barriers that might otherwise have remained unquestioned. Whenever Sarah shared Chance's story, whether in school classrooms or conference halls, She always ended with the same message: compassion is a choice we make moment by moment. The hand that reaches out to help, whether to an animal or another person, changes not just one life but countless others in ways we may never fully know. And Chance himself, who had once been thrown away like something worthless, had become a living embodiment of that message, carrying in his gentle eyes and resilient spirit the profound truth that even in a world where cruelty exists, the capacity for compassion, healing, and transformation is stronger still. His story continues to inspire all who hear it to look more deeply, care more fully, and recognize the extraordinary potential for renewal that exists in every life, no matter how broken it may seem.